So I know that the iPhone 16e has just been announced, and we will be getting that in the studio this week, so definitely subscribe to the channel if you haven't for some awesome content around that. But it looks like we're already getting an idea and a shape of what the iPhone 17 lineup is going to look like this year, and honestly, it looks like it's going to be one of the most unique and different iPhone lineups that we've seen in years past, so let's talk about exactly what to expect. So to give everybody a quick rundown on the current iPhone 16 lineup, of course we have the new 16e, which is going to be the new budget-friendly $600 iPhone 16, but then the normal kind of four options that we've had for about 5 years now at this point are still around. So you have the regular 16, 16 Plus, which is basically a regular 16, just a little bit bigger in screen size. Then you have the 16 Pro and the 16 Pro Max, which are going to be your upper level, higher tier iPhones, and the price is going to correspond with that. But this upcoming year is going to be a little bit different because, of course, we're still going to have the 16e, and I think the 16e is going to remain there for at least 18 months until we get the iPhone, I guess, 18 lineup. Maybe they'll kind of revamp it at that point. But that one's going to be the mainstay, and that one's going to be the one that's going to be quote-unquote free or zero down when it comes to going into a carrier and purchasing the latest iPhone that's out there. But now with the iPhone 17 lineup, we're going to get basically 4 different iPhones almost completely from not only a design language standpoint, but from a capability standpoint, from an internal standpoint. So let's start off with the iPhone 17 and what we know so far, because that one's going to be the most familiar one. The iPhone 17 is essentially going to be the new version of the iPhone 16. It's going to look the most familiar. It's still going to have the vertical layout of the camera bump. It'll probably have some different colors to choose from, but the material choices, the form factor, the size of the display, the 60 Hz, like I said, the rear camera is a selfie camera, USB-C is still going to be there. We're going to have the action button, the camera control. That one's going to be pretty much the same exact phone, just with a little bit spec'd up internals overall. So it should get an upgrade on the selfie camera from 12 megapixels to a 24 megapixel camera. We're going to get the A19 instead of the A18 chip. We'll still have 8 gigs of RAM, but maybe Apple opens up an extra 1 or 2 GPU cores because it does have an A19 chip versus the A18. But for all intents and purposes, it's going to be the same exact phone as we had from previous years, just with a little bit of an extra kind of spice and bump internally. One change that we might see across the entire lineup is going to be the new C1 chip, which is going to be Apple's new Qualcomm competitor, the ability to have an in-house 5G modem built into the iPhone, and we're already seeing, even before we get the iPhone 16e in hand, that is going to be extremely beneficial for battery life overall. So maybe the iPhone 16 could be the battery life champ because it's going to be the same phone as last year, just with better internal specs when it comes to the C1 chip, giving us extra battery life. Now this next iPhone in the 17 lineup is going to be the most interesting one because we don't really know where it's going to stand from a price point perspective specifically, but the new iPhone 17 Air or 17 Slim, I think it's going to be the iPhone 17 Air, but that one's going to replace the Plus lineup of iPhones. So it'll still be a larger form factor, so I believe we're going to have a 6.7-inch display on this iPhone 17 Air, but the actual design is going to be completely different from what we've seen. So it's going to be the thinnest iPhone ever at 5.5 millimeters at its thinnest point, compared to the current iPhone, which I believe is 8.3 or 8.5 millimeters. So it should reduce the thickness of the iPhone about 30 to 35%, which is relatively impressive when you are dealing with these small numbers. Now this phone is going to be all about form over function. Of course, it's still going to have the latest and greatest when it comes to internals and everything that Apple can put forward, but they're really going to focus on the overall size to performance ratio when it comes to thinness and kind of heat management standpoint and efficiency. Like that's what they're going to flex their muscles on with this phone. It'll have the new C1 chip in there. It'll have an A19 chip, not the A19 Pro. And what's interesting about this one is that it's going to have one single camera on the rear, similar to the iPhone 16e. It should have a new design on the rear to kind of give a visor on the back of the iPhone, so it kind of looks a little bit more uniform overall, but do expect only one single sensor, probably a 48 megapixel shooter, probably the same one that we've seen the main camera sensor for the iPhone 16 models right now, but do know that it's going to be just looking different overall. And this one should have a higher refresh rate as well, so this could be an OLED display, this could be a 120 Hz display, it could be a Pro Motion display, but that's where it gets a little bit confusing because we're not sure if this is going to be cheaper than the iPhone 17 Pro, or at the same price point, or it's going to be more expensive overall, or if maybe the entire lineup of iPhone 17 is going to be just a little bit more expensive because of this phone. So we're still trying to figure out what the price point on this phone is going to be, but I am curious to see exactly what Apple ends up doing it and where exactly in the lineup it stands. So now let's get into the big boys, the iPhone 17 Pro and iPhone 17 Pro Max. From the front side of it, it's going to look relatively the same. We're still going to have a 6.3-inch display with tiny bezels overall for the Pro model, and then that 6.9-inch display that we got with the 16 models on the iPhone 17 Pro Max. One thing that you will notice that's going to be a little bit different on the front end is that on the 17 Pro Max specifically, The dynamic island should actually be a little bit smaller compared to previous years, while the 17 Pro will still have the same normal size dynamic island. I remember we saw this when the notch first came around on the iPhone 10, and then you compared it to like the 13 Pro Max. The notch got way smaller on the 13 Pro Max compared to something like the iPhone 11 or even the 12 Pro Max. So that's something to take note of when looking at the dynamic island on the new 17 Pro Max. But we recently got some CAD renders showing off the rear of all these different iPhones, and they all look a little bit different overall. So the one that I really want to highlight is going to be the 17 Pro and Pro Max because it looks a little bit different from years past. First, you're going to see that we have the same horizontal overlay for the camera rear or the camera bump that we're going to be seeing on the 17 Air. It's going to go across the entire iPhone, bringing some sort of symmetry to the iPhone, which has been lacking for years past. We're still going to have the triangle kind of layout and orientation of the camera sensors on the rear with the main shooter, the ultra-wide, as well as the 5x telephoto. Hopefully it's a 10x telephoto at this point. But then the actual flash, the LiDAR scanner, and every other sensor is going to be extended all the way across the phone to the right-hand side with a nice little protrusion to kind of keep everything balanced and symmetrical at the end of the day, which I think I'm overall a fan of. And I think Apple will kind of give us a two-tone colorway when it comes to having a darker color on the camera bump and then a lighter color on the rest of the iPhone body. And now you also see in the renders that there is this kind of red cutout in there. Now that's not going to be something visually that we can see as the end user or as the end customer, but that's essentially going to be glass to allow for the MagSafe charging. So I think the iPhone is going to be built out of some sort of combination of titanium and aluminum, but then that section right there is going to be made out of glass to allow for that pass-through and MagSafe charging. And then some other notable changes for the Pro models especially is that we're going to get the A19 Pro chip, which will level us up to about 12 gigs of RAM internally to help with things like app management, but more importantly, Apple Intelligence and being able to have as much stuff that involves Apple Intelligence be run on device. Now we did get the recent 18.4 beta update and there's still no kind of in-app actions or kind of screen context or screen awareness, contextual rules when it comes to Apple Intelligence, so that'll probably come with an 18.5 update, but I'm sure it will really debut with the iOS 19 that comes out in September alongside something like the new iPhone 17 Pro and Pro Max models. Another upgrade that we'll see is an upgrade to the actual selfie camera, similar to the other models that I mentioned, going from 12 to 24 megapixels for the selfie camera, and then like I said, the Pro Max version will have a smaller dynamic island. And then one more thing to mention is that these Pro and Pro Max models will probably still have the Qualcomm 5G modem, with the 18 Pro and Pro Max being the first Pro level phones that'll get Apple's in-house C1 and probably at that point C2 chip for their in-house 5G modem. So overall, I for one am excited just from a visual standpoint because these iPhones, especially on the front side, have remained stagnant and have looked the same for a very long time. So getting some changes just to visually see exactly what's going on and being able to tell which one's which and having some sort of design and profile language to each individual iPhone is something that's relatively unique and something we haven't seen in a very long time from Apple, if at all. Maybe when we had the first original iPhone 10 that kind of changed up because we had the regular iPhone 8 series, but then we had the iPhone 10. Now this time around we're going to have the 16e, but then we're going to have the regular 17, the 17 Air, which is going to be a very interesting phone to see exactly who Apple's trying to kind of sell this one to, what the point of that phone is, if there's going to be a lot of detriment from a functionality standpoint to make sure that it's as thin as possible. And then of course you have the big ones that are going to flex their muscles with the camera department of the 17 Pro and Pro Max, and it's going to be Apple's latest and greatest from a tech perspective. But I do think price points are going to change. I do think the 17 is going to remain at $800, with the 17 Air being $1,000, and then $1,200 and $1,400 respectively for the entry-level versions of the Pro models. So let's see exactly what Apple ends up doing with these iPhones overall from a price point and how they're going to position this and market this to everybody in the future. But that'll do it for this video, everybody. If you did make it to the end, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below so I know you made it to the end. And let me know in the comment down below also what you think. Which iPhone are you most excited for? Which one's giving you the most intrigue? Always curious to know. But if you want to watch more videos like this one, definitely check out one of these videos right here. And until next time, I'm Fernando. Peace, everybody.